Welcome to my presentation on perfectionism in more able and talented learners. My name is Laura Fennick and I'm a postgraduate researcher at York St John University. I am also part of the Motivation, Performance and Wellbeing Research Group, also known as MPOR, which is led by Professor Andrew Hill. MPOR is a mix of academic staff and research students in the area of psychology and sport and exercise psychology. Firstly, what is perfectionism? Perfectionism is a multidimensional personality trait that involves striving for exceedingly high standards and overly critical evaluative tendencies. If we break down this definition, first of all, perfectionism is multidimensional, so there are many aspects of perfectionism. One of the two main aspects is striving for high standards, but not just high standards, exceedingly high or even unrealistic standards. These standards are accompanied by overly critical evaluation, where every performance is scrutinised, where even one minor or inconsequential mistake can mean a failure. Perfectionism can be intrapersonal and interpersonal. Therefore, these high standards can be set by and directed to the self. The high standards can be directed towards others and they will be judged by these standards. Or these standards can be perceived to come from others and that these others will judge you. There are many models and measures of perfectionism that capture different aspects and dimensions of perfectionism. This makes it difficult to interpret and compare research when different measures have been adopted. However, these models and measures can be integrated to form the two-factor perfectionism model. The first factor, perfectionistic strivings, captures aspects associated with striving for perfection and setting extremely high personal performance standards. The second factor, perfectionistic concerns, captures concerns over making mistakes, negative reactions to imperfection, and feelings of discrepancy between one's expectations and performance. This review, funded by NACE, the National Association for Able Children in Education, Grugan and colleagues conducted a systematic review of the literature on perfectionism and academically gifted students. An initial literature search conducted in April 2019 resulted in 159 studies. These studies were then screened by title, abstract, and then full text. After the removal of duplicates and any unrelated papers, 36 studies remained. Of these, 24 adopted a variable-based approach, where they measured a version of perfectionistic strivings and perfectionistic concerns. And 12 adopted a group-based approach, where participants are divided into groups based on varying levels of perfectionistic strivings and perfectionistic concerns. So what did the systematic review tell us? Academic achievement was measured in a number of ways across the studies, including grade point average, individual test scores, and general intelligence. Perfectionistic concerns were unrelated or negatively related to objective achievement. Perfectionistic strivings were unrelated or positively related to academic achievement. In terms of personality factors, perfectionistic concerns show a more maladaptive profile, as it was related to fixed mindset beliefs, neuroticism, and emotional overexcitabilities. Perfectionistic strivings was related to a more positive profile that includes growth mindset beliefs, conscientiousness, and intellectual overexcitabilities. For motivation, perfectionistic concerns were related to a more negative pattern, including lower school motivation, occupational amotivation, and avoidance goal orientation. Avoidance goal orientation involves avoiding a display of incompetence. Perfectionistic strivings was related to more positive motivational outcomes, such as favourable school achievement attitudes and academic aspirations. However, it was also related to both performance approach and performance avoidance goal orientations. Performance goals are referenced against others rather than personal improvement. Performance approach goals aim to outperform others, and performance avoidance goals aim to not be worse than others. In terms of emotion and well-being, perfectionistic concerns showed a negative relationship with indicators of subjective well-being and self-efficacy. For example, positive affect, and positive relationships with negative emotions such as depression. Perfectionistic strivings showed positive relationships with indicators of subjective well-being and self-efficacy, such as life satisfaction and positive affect. However, perfectionistic strivings was negatively related to happiness, meaning that the higher you score in perfectionistic strivings, the lower you score in happiness. And in terms of interpersonal relationships, the most consistent finding was that perfectionistic concerns was positively related to alienation from mothers and fathers. Some things to keep in mind when interpreting this research. Firstly, there were differences across the studies as to how the gifted students were identified. Secondly, different measures of perfectionism were used. Although the two-factor model helps align similar aspects of perfectionism together, some dimensions are not interchangeable and cannot be directly compared. Although we can statistically separate perfectionistic concerns from perfectionistic strivings, if we refer back to the definition of perfectionism, of strivings alongside concerns, it is more likely that students will have levels of both aspects. Perfectionistic concerns were consistently related to maladaptive outcomes in students identified as academically gifted, whereas perfectionistic strivings were related to both adaptive and maladaptive outcomes. Therefore, perfectionistic concerns are likely to interfere with the healthy adjustment and performance of gifted learners, but perfectionistic strivings are more mixed. So what can teachers do to help? This is where the perfectionistic climate comes in. The perfectionistic climate refers to the cues and messages that promote the view that performances must be perfect and less than perfect performances are unacceptable. Performances in this case could be answering a question or test scores and grades. The cues and messages are created by important social agents, for example the teacher, and can be communicated both deliberately and accidentally. Teachers also have the potential to help reduce how perfectionistic the classroom is by modifying the language that is used, how tasks are structured, and the strategies that are used to reward or deter student behaviour. The perfectionistic climate is made up of 5 components. The first component is unrealistic expectations. These expectations are never lowered. They do not take into account students' individual ability, their personal progress, or their individual circumstance. The next component is criticism. When performances are not perfect, criticism will be frequent and excessive. It could focus on even minor and inconsequential mistakes. The next component is control. The use of coercive behaviour to pressure students to perform perfectly. For example, using language such as you must or you should, or embarrassing or punishing students to get them to perform perfectly or avoid mistakes. The next component is conditional regard. This is the withdrawal and manipulation of recognition and appreciation based upon performance. For example, being more pleasant to a student when the correct answers are given. The final component is anxiousness. Here the teacher is worried and preoccupied about mistakes and the consequences of not performing perfectly. The teacher may highlight where potential mistakes could happen and is worried when students take risk or deviate from instructions. So what can teachers do? In terms of expectations, it is likely that students will know what is expected of them in terms of behaviour and grades. However, these targets must be realistic. Although they can still be challenging, they should be adaptable for each student. Feedback is an important part of learning. However, it should focus on the qualities of the work and not the qualities of the learner. Ensure to highlight the positives and avoid pointing out unimportant mistakes, especially when the work reflects a student's best effort or shows progress. It may be difficult to avoid the use of rewards and sanctions. However, rewards should focus on effort rather than innate qualities, and sanctions should encourage a sense of personal ownership. Importantly, students should feel liked and valued, regardless of their performances and behaviours. And finally, mistakes should be considered a normal part of learning. Focus on creativity, problem solving, and opportunities for learning through trial and improvement. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me by email or contact Professor Andrew Hill, who leads the MPOR research group. On this page is a link to our animation describing the different aspects of perfectionism. There's also a link to a series of worksheets designed to help young people understand perfectionism. And finally, a link to the resources created in collaboration with NACE, all about perfectionism and more able learners. The animation is also available through this link, but also available with Welsh subtitles. If you would like to do some further reading of the work mentioned in this presentation, here are the references.